Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey-Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Wednesday, November 17th. I can't believe it's November 17th. We will hear, is it November 17th? It is November 17th. We will hear the presentation, Plagiarism and Ethics, Where to Draw the Line. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the questions box located in your GoToWebinar tool panel. For your content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in that questions box and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. And I did take a peek at the slide deck, and I know that there's a disclaimer about legal advice in there, I think, but just to reiterate again, when we get to the Q&A, you know, this is more of a discussion. These are not concrete answers, you know, and I'm sure they'll get into that, what you need to do in order to get to that. Oh, good. We have our last panelist was able to join us. Wonderful. So anyway, type your questions in and we will get to those during the Q&A. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our APA sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2021. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, we're sponsored by the Kansas chapter of APA. So thanks to you for hosting, and we look forward to today's great session. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our final sessions for 2021. You'll see my little arrow. I just added our final session for December 3rd about 15 minutes ago. So be sure and register for our upcoming sessions at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And we are booking already for 2022. We're actually booked January and February already. So those sessions will become available for you to register soon. But for sure, check out our webcast website to register for these sessions. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM ethics. So be sure to log those credits by heading over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and from there you can either search by today's title or event number, both of which can be found on our website. Again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. If you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That is where I post any timely information like date or time changes. I will also post when new sessions are available for you to register, and I send weekly reminders of our upcoming sessions. We record all of our sessions and we post them on our YouTube channel, so be sure to head over there and subscribe to our channel so that you get notified when a new session is up and available for you to view. We have well over 350 sessions that are there for you to search and view. So that's the end of my housekeeping items. Again, type your questions in the chat box. And I'm giving you a heads up that we have a very interactive session ahead of us with lots of polling questions. So be sure to stick with us and pay attention so that you can participate. That's always interesting to do it that way. If you are on a mobile device, depending on your carrier, you may or may not have access to these polling questions, depending if you are logged in through a browser or through a mobile device app. So just disclaimer, if you don't see the pop-ups, it's probably because you're on a browser and not within our app. And finally, I am seeing some hand raises. Don't raise your hand, type a question in. I can't do anything about you raising your hand other than wave at you. So be sure to type your question in if you have one. Okay, with that, I am going to turn everything over to Bonnie Johnson, who is kicking off today's session. Bonnie, I am giving those controls over to you.
Okay. Does it look like I have a PowerPoint presentation up?
Yes, it does.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very good. That's a good sign. Okay, well, welcome everybody, and we will get going. There are going to be some polling questions. I'm going to be the moderator, and throughout I will occasionally turn things over to my co-presenters, Staryn and Kim. And as you might notice on this PowerPoint, instead of worrying about what pictures or images are copyright or not, I took my own pictures. And so I just dispensed with that whole question and did my own. So they may look a little amateurish, but I didn't violate copyright. Although I did copy and paste the planning webcast series thing in here, so I don't know. Let's get going. We entitled this session really, where do you draw the line? Because understanding where you cross the line on, yeah, I've maybe copied and pasted too much or in an inappropriate way. Where do we know when we've stepped over the line and have perhaps gone too far? And so that's what we're going to be delving into today. So meet your panelists. So I'm Bonnie Johnson. I'm the program director and I'm a professor of urban planning at the University of Kansas. And we are all, Staryn, Kim, and I are all members of the AICP Ethics Committee. And this topic of plagiarism came up a little while ago now. And as the committee discussed, we realized there were lots of subtleties to this topic and even some differences of opinion based on whether you were from academia or the public sector or the private sector. One thing about being on the ethics committee we have discovered is that as individuals, we may come into the discussion with one point of view, and then we discuss and listen, and sometimes we end up with very different opinions by the time we decide what to do. So our panelists will discuss and reveal these different points of view as we go along. We're going to get started, but Staryn, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Sure, thanks, Bonnie. My name is Staryn Fauché, and as Bonnie alluded to before, I'm a transportation planner with WSP located in our Dallas office. And this is going to be my last year. Well, I think it will be my last year on the AICP Ethics Committee, which is kind of sad because I actually really enjoy reading the cases and just, I'm not going to say I enjoy the gossip of planning because that's not really what it is, but you just find out that there's a lot going on in planning in terms of things like plagiarism. Like things go well beyond taking someone to lunch when you're not supposed to take them to lunch. There's a lot of nuances.
Okay, Kim, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Kim Mickelson, and I'm an attorney. I'm currently the senior assistant city attorney here in the legal department in Houston. My client, you might expect, is the planning department and public works on planning related questions. So fits right in with my interest and my background. I am a former Texas chapter president and currently serve as Region 3 commissioner on the AICP Commission. I think I'm halfway through just about my term, and the Ethics Committee, as Staryn mentions, is a really interesting place. And coming from a really regulated profession myself, where ethics is always at question if you are a lawyer. Think of all the lawyer jokes you hear. It's interesting to see what kinds of issues come up in other professions. So as he says, it's interesting. It's been a lot of fun, and there are lots of nuances to all of these cases, and you'll get to hear and talk about some of those during the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. So really, this is about what we as planners think about the profession and professional behavior. As we go along, if you have questions, put those in, and then at the end, we're going to have 20 or 30 minutes to answer questions, and Christine is going to help us moderate that. But I particularly want to point out that ethics sessions are really good for students or beginning planners because you're going to hear about those things that that stop even the most experienced planners in their tracks. We will talk about the planning profession and how we access and use information. So this session will give you some guidance for how to think through ethical dilemmas using the AICP Code of Ethics. And for new planners, new to the profession, remember that the APA Career Center can connect you with a mentor who can serve as a sounding board about your professional career along the way. But remember, mentor or no, the ethics officer is really the one to lean on for informal guidance. And then through the ethics officer, he can usher things through the process for formal opinions from the ethics committee. Here's the disclaimer that I must read. This session has been created to provide general education regarding the AICP Code of Ethics. Though examples, sample problems, and question and answer sessions are an important part of illustrating application of the code's provisions, all certified planners should be aware that only the ethics officer is authorized to give informal advice on the propriety of a planner's proposed conduct, and only the ethics committee can give a formal opinion. So if you have a specific question regarding a situation arising in your practice, you're encouraged to seek the opinion of the ethics officer, who is Jim Peters, who you see larger than life on your screens. So what are we going to discuss in this session? Here's just a little bit of an outline. We'll start off with, what did you learn about plagiarism in school? But then what does the AICP code say? What do we planners do as a matter of practice? And then through our scenarios and polling, we're going to see what is your comfort level with borrowing material from other sources. So we're going to calibrate that through some scenarios and polling. And lastly, we're going to touch on public participation and the free labor of the public, particularly marginalized groups, that we often are asking a lot of citizens, and in particular marginalized groups. Maybe we should think about the ethics of, should we be paying them for their time? So those are what we're going to be doing. I'm going to point out, let me see. Oh yeah. On this slide, I'm intended to point out that from a book on my bookshelf, actually copyright 1958 from Random House, is the definition of plagiarizing. To plagiarize and plagiarism, copying or imitating the language, ideas, and thoughts of another author and passing off the same as one's original work, something appropriated and put forth in this manner. So I kind of appreciated actually pulling a physical book off my bookshelf and getting a definition. So there you go. So I'm going to stop for a while, and then I'm gonna be quiet. And I think, Kim, you're going to take over avoiding academic misconduct in school.
We'll start with that.
Okay.
And I guess in my introduction, I neglected to add that I have also taught in the Masters in Urban Planning programs, both at Texas A&M. Do I hear the whoop out there? I'm sure that's going on. And at Texas Southern University, I've taught planning law, plan implementation, and co-taught a couple of other classes. So I'm even well aware of all of the avoiding academic misconduct, and particularly for you young planners or fairly recently out of school. You'll remember I think at both colleges now, it's like a 1.5-page disclaimer about honor code and plagiarism, and if you use it, you can be if you do plagiarize and are found guilty of that, then you can be terminated from school. So it has serious implications in your academic life. So, and remember, professors have data and plagiarism checkers, and your documents leave a metadata trail. And trust me, at least from my perspective as a lawyer, I know how to use that. But I'm sure professors do as well. But you know, what is it? Plagiarism is kind of broadly defined as using someone else's work without citing the source or attributing to it, without putting it in quotes. If you're taking it directly from them, even if you're adjusting some of the words, you know, you can get really close to plagiarism if you don't attribute the idea that is the central concept of the provision you're using. Copying and pasting from the internet without citing the source is a problem. You know, there's now absolutely professional ways to cite internet sources, and you need to be familiar with that and see them. They'll pop up in plagiarism checkers if that happens. At least in the academic context. Not paraphrasing properly, I kind of have alluded to, but if it's paraphrased, you still need to cite and attribute the author of that idea. You might not get caught, maybe nobody really cares. You know, everybody wants to get a good grade, you're stressed at night, you're trying to get this paper done, we've all been there. I remember those days too. So, but just really understand that the citations and attribution, how important that is to really the validity of your work that you're putting in.
Yeah, and Kim, I will point out that when I've done research with planning commissioners, what they're really wanting to know is how did staff reach their conclusions? So it's all about transparency. So they want to know what's behind the curtain, or what happens in that black box of a staff recommendation. So citing sources and revealing those things is all about that, being transparent, and, you know, let others into how you reached your decision.
Yeah, and that's how it extends into your practice once you've graduated, and you still have those same standards, and maybe nobody's checking at that point, but yeah, again, people want to know where it came from, and sometimes if you work for a city, people want to know who's the outside expert that said that. Maybe they don't like experts, it depends on your audience, but it varies, but it's important to know where that came from, and that's a way too of letting your commission and public know that, wow, she really does know her stuff.
Yeah, we know something.
We're professionals.
Yes.
So, and there is such a thing as this notes, common knowledge. We all know some basic things. You might add in the staff reports. Well, I don't know. Not everybody knows Jane Jacobs, I guess, but you know, certain things planners know. I have Jane Jacobs here in my office with me. But you know, you might say, as in, you know, Greenwich Village, that this is a similar type of project, and then you can explain it. But you don't have to cite to any historical source, but yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move into, well, what does the code say about this? So, you know, we know from, you know, being in school, but let's think about what the AICP code says. And so we're going to practice a polling question here and see how well you know your AICP code. So which section or sections of the AICP Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct is or are enforceable? So we've got A, principles to which we aspire, B, our rules of conduct, C, advisory opinions, D, adjudication of complaints and misconduct, E, discipline of members, sections A and B, or section C and E. I have to
Oh, it's going.
Oh, it's
The poll
going?
is going.
Okay.
I don't think my panelists, you all, unfortunately, don't get to vote.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
But it
That's
is
because
going, and
It is going.
we've got responses coming in.
Good.
I'm going to give it a few more seconds here. We've got about 50% of the folks have responded so far.
Cool.
So,
excellent.
yeah, I'm just going to give another second, and then I'll share those results. Give me one more second. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll, and then I will show the results. My panelists, can you see the results or no?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Oh,
Okay.
wait, no.
No?
Oh, yeah,
I
I
can.
can. I can.
I was going to say, what makes you so special, Kim?
I don't know, but it's right up
Okay.
here on the screen in the
Surprise
lovely
me.
blue box.
Oh.
So right now we've got poll results section A, 15%, section B, rules of conduct, 89%, section C, advisory opinions, 16, section D, adjudication of complaints at 46, and E, discipline of members.
Okay. Well, if you did say B, our rules of conduct, you are correct. So this shows the different sections of the Code of Ethics, and section A are those like principles to which we aspire. We all would like to be superheroes and be perfect, but we're human and we might not always get it right, but we can aspire and keep trying. That's the key, is to keep trying. Section B are the rules that are more clear cut. They're based on the aspirations, but then that is what someone would base a complaint on. And then the others are sections are kind of how does filing a complaint work? What happens? How do you find out about a decision? Things like that. So that was good practice for our polling.
Yeah.
And now, yeah, Kim?
I was going to add too on some of those, the question about it being, which are enforceable, those who picked section E, discipline of members, we do sometimes get repeat questions. We've disciplined a member this way and they haven't followed what they've agreed to. I mean, it does come back. And so, I mean, in a way that's enforcement, but right. That is something that does get followed up on, and the committee sometimes hears a second time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Staren, do you want to go over the principles to which we aspire?
I guess this would be a good section because this is my favorite section to talk about when I'm giving presentations, and people are actually giving me a hard time about that. So I think the biggest and maybe the most important principle is, that this is our overall responsibility to the public. So everything falls under that in terms of the impacts of the plans that we create. We want to make sure that everything we're putting out there is, I guess geared towards the betterment of society in terms of contributing to planning, contributing to students, contributing, because it's a holistic approach. We're not just planning for our city. In a sense, what we do for our city helps make the overall country better. And so sharing that knowledge is improving overall the United States is how I look at it. So, and that's what a lot of what the principles talk about, paying attention to the interrelatedness of planning decisions, looking at the impacts of those plans that we create. So it all goes together, and you could say it's pie in the sky, but I think this is the most important part because it affects the actual work that we're doing, not just getting people in trouble or not.
Yeah, it's really our foundational values. And then the things that are particular to plagiarism, that the rights of others, we can think about giving credit, long-range consequences of present actions, give credit and leave a trail so that others know how to get to the information, being timely and clear. you know, if you're working quick, maybe make sure you're still being transparent and still doing those things, the integrity of the profession. But, you know, we're supposed to use research and experience in the body of planning knowledge. So we're supposed to be using those things. We can just, you know, give credit.
Say who it is.
Yeah,
Right.
say who it is. Yeah. So Kim, do you want to do the rules?
Our rules of conduct. We get a little more serious here,
Yeah.
kind of with some more concrete ideas. But, you know, we can't, you know, deliberately, or I love the phrase with reckless indifference, which is open to lots of interpretation. But, you know, the rules of conduct really touch upon what we do in our actions. And so intentional use or failure to provide information, you know, accepting an assignment from an employer, fooling an employer, you know, taking a second job without permission of an employer. You know, it really goes to the idea that these set forward some basic principles. Don't misstate your education, your experience, any other training in a request. And that can sometimes be hard if you're looking for a job. It's kind of easy to fluff a resume, and so you have to be very careful about that. Because people do check, and that question sometimes gets back to the ethics committee. But, you know, and think too really about what your skill set is. So as a lawyer, we have the same thing. You know, you can't accept work that's beyond your professional expertise. Do not ask me a question about bankruptcy. But if you want to know about zoning and exactions, there I am. But, you know, you can't accept work outside of that area or your realm of expertise, because who's paying for your learning curve?
Right. And
Yeah.
we actually had a case about that. I think it was this past year, right, Bonnie, where
Yeah.
someone called into question the planner's experience writing, I don't know if it was a code of ordinance, but he also said that he stole it from another place and that he had no experience and he wasn't qualified to do it. And so
Yeah.
the fact that what he did, right, and so the fact that it looked and it pretty much was identical to a plan that was done elsewhere, it made that planner look less qualified. And overall, that diminishes our profession because it makes it look like, oh, well, any old person can copy and paste something. I don't need to hire a planner to do this work. I don't need a master's degree to do this work because I can copy and paste what somebody else did. So it's very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we had lots. Sorry, Bonnie, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. And I think we've got a scenario similar
Oh,
to
I'm
that.
sorry.
So
I did jump
no,
ahead.
that's okay. We'll see what people say. But Darren, you're dead on. Planning practice. So what do we do day to day that may, I don't know, get us into trouble or we should maybe be aware of?
Think about.
Yeah, there are a lot of gray areas in terms of plagiarism and planning, and this is actually an argument I made during that case, is that plagiarism may be an unspoken part of planning culture. Because again, part of what we want to do is impart knowledge to other planners. We want, if we have a great code of ordinance that we've drafted, of course we'll allow another city to copy it. I was working on a study down in Laredo, Texas, or it was for Laredo, Texas, earlier this year, and I was looking at their ordinance, and then I looked at some ordinances at some of the other cities bordering them, and they were all the exact same language, just the names changed. But it's not that, and they didn't hire a consultant to do it. They just liked what the neighboring city was doing, so they just adopted it. And so, yes, it is copying, but at the same time, you're adding to the body of knowledge. Why write something brand new when it's already perfect? If it's perfect for your city, then go ahead and adopt it. And the problem comes when a consultant does that. And that's something that we'll get to later on. But again, what we want to do is make sure that we're feeding the profession training younger students, giving them opportunities. We have best practices for a reason, so you can see what's been done in other places and how it may impact our community if we did it. And so you can't copy and paste directly, but you could definitely borrow and cite ideas. Next slide.
Okay.
And I'll add a little bit to that. Thinking about, especially with ordinances, there is a portion of copyright law that talks that public documents, governmental documents, are exempt from copyright. So, copying an ordinance is not necessarily the problem. I think the problem arises more in making sure it really does fit the city that you are then taking it to. And I worked with a small community here in Houston, it's been many years ago. They were 700 people, and they're at least 10 times that now, I showed up to help them write a subdivision ordinance, and they waived Houston's Chapter 49 or 42 subdivision regulations and said, we want to use this. And I'm thinking, yeah, you really don't. This is a difference of scale here. Let's think about what really works at this level. And so, but yeah, using some of that or boilerplate, it's hard to avoid boilerplate.
Yeah, Darren, you're going to tell us about how planners learn on the job. And you introduced me to something that I didn't know what it was, which was a go-by.
I hate that
never
term.
heard
I
that
really
before.
hate that term. I feel like I'm cheating when someone asks me, hey, can I get a go-by for that? Or here's a go-by for this particular type of project. And it's really just to see the process, how it's done. You're not supposed to copy and paste it and just switch out the names. You're not, especially with an actual planning document. As a consultant or a public sector employee, really, if you're being paid to do that job, you need to do it. Don't copy and paste it. But looking at the process, knowing what items need to be included in a particular plan, like that's something that's very important. So when I got out of grad school, I thought I knew everything. I thought I knew everything. I went to the University of Oklahoma. It was a great transportation program. I don't do half the stuff that I did in that program because I'm not a modeler. I'm focused on modeling. But in other terms, I was like, man, I know all this stuff already. I know GIS. I'm a GIS guru. I took this advanced, GIS class. And so the first assignment I was given is to make this map. And so I was going through some crazy drawn out process, how I learned to do it in school. And one of the older guys came by and he's like, why are you doing it like that? And he made that map in a few clicks. And I was taking this drawn out process to do it. So a lot of what we learn in school provides a really good foundation. But in terms of actually developing plans and just learning how to navigate the politics of being a planner, you learn that on the job. And so one of the ways that as a consultant, actually in the public sector as well, but one of the ways it is through the use of go-bys. We will give somebody, so say a young planner is working on a comprehensive plan. They never worked on one before. They never done an economic market analysis. They never done a thoroughfare plan. And so we give them an existing thoroughfare plan so they see how to do it. Functional classification, rights of way, those things, but then there's the subtle nuances that a young planner will need to know that he may not know when he first gets on the job. And so those go-bys are important. And again, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I was working on I guess I was reviewing a plan document when I was in the public sector, and one of the subtitles looked really familiar to me. So I Googled it, and of course, it popped up in 3 different documents that were done by that same consultant. I went through and I read the text, and the text was different, but it was very similar. And so I called them out on it. But it wasn't until I was in the private sector that I realized that it's standard practice to use those go-bys, but you don't want to be verbatim document to document.
Darren, I'm gonna interrupt if I might, and I normally don't interrupt for questions, but there are a bunch of people that are commenting, what's a go-by? So you need to break it down for us.
Okay, so
there's still questions. So before we go any further.
Yes.
All right, so what a go-by is, when you're given an assignment for a document, for instance, right now I'm working on an automated truck study, looking at the workforce impacts. So I'm lost because there's not a lot out there that's been done already. So I was like, oh man, there's no real go-by for this. I wish I had a go-by. So someone at some point may use my document for that. But for instance, when you're working on a thoroughfare plan, someone will say, well, you need to write the existing conditions section. So you give that person an old existing conditions section from a previous document, and you use that as an outline to know which items you need to include. But then you also look at how the data variables are analyzed. Of course, you know the population growth, the employment sectors in an area. Those are basic facts. But then how you analyze them, how you apply that to meet those issues, to meet those needs, the go by just helps set your frame of mind and thinking in terms of addressing those issues. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to be just a how-to guide on how to develop that document. But really, you're just looking at a previous document that's been completed.
It's a fancy way of saying an example.
It's an example. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, we might call it.
Put it.
Yeah, I've heard it called kind of too like a terms and conditions sheet, and
Yeah.
how you break it down, and same idea.
Yeah.
And I'll add to Sterone's comment about the kind of Googling the title of something. I do think that planning firms a lot of times tend to brand their stuff. And part of that is in their format and their standard kind of language, which, yes, you hope gets modified, but how much is necessary is always the question. So, but again, it's somewhat boilerplate.
Exactly. And as a private sector planner, we often have to balance budget constraints with client or public expectations. When I was in the public sector, I loved creating robust scopes with so many items in it. And then you go to negotiate with the consultant and they push back saying, there's no way we can do this for the budget. But my first plan that I actually wrote myself in the private sector, it was for a city I'm not going to name, but they had $25,000 for a thoroughfare plan, but they wanted $200,000 worth of work. And we were trying to get a larger contract down the line for a roadway project. And so we did it. And I kept getting dinged and kept getting in trouble for being over budget. But I had to manage client expectations and what we wanted with the client later on. But oftentimes, one of the strategies they teach us at planning project management courses is that to lower the cost of completing a project, you will assign duties to a lower level planner. When you submit a proposal for an RFP, you'll have your all-stars, your best staff on that proposal. But those people aren't always going to be the ones doing the work, because a $100,000 study will end up costing $500,000 just because of how much it costs to pay a high-level private sector planner. So what we'd often do is you have the higher level planner does QC, but the lower level planner using a go by will oftentimes do the actual writing in a document. But that lower level planner is also given credit in the report. The higher level planner isn't taking all the credit, because you want your up and coming planners to get credit for the work that they do, but also tackling those little tasks. It builds their resume and it builds their confidence in terms of creating and finishing projects. But the idea of boilerplate material, it's very important, because usually boilerplate material is something that's required. You have to state it. And it's already been written, it's already been perfected, it's put together, it's packaged very well, and you just drop it into documents. There was a land use and roadway access diagram that I've seen in probably 100% of the thoroughfare plans I've ever looked at. They've been slightly revised, put pictures, the colors have been changed. They're always slightly different, but they're the exact same boilerplate diagram that you see in every document. But it's just very important to make sure you're citing those documents. And as Kim was saying before, it's common knowledge. So where do I go to find something that I've seen in every single thoroughfare plan? And then I go Googling the document, and I'll see it in a TxDOT document. So I'm like, well, I could cite it in TxDOT, but I know it came from somewhere else. So, where do I cite it? And then I've used the graphic so many times, I could draw it myself from memory. But if I drop it in a document like that, someone's going to say, well, you need to source this image, but where am I going to get the source from when I made it myself? I have the knowledge. And so at some point, you need to figure out where your knowledge translates into the the actual work or the work that you're citing as you get more experience as a planner.
Yeah.
And in
Well,
terms of,
yeah,
sorry,
yeah, go ahead, Darren.
I was gonna say just in terms of doing the work, there are differences in the public sector and the private sector, but people cut corners. I guess people cut corners and people do all kinds of things to save budget, and plagiarism is one of the things that people do to save budget, so you don't have to research and do all that work. But I'll let you start the next slide.
Okay.
Well, this
Yeah,
slide.
copyright. So Kim, what about this copyright thing we've heard of?
So I've already mentioned the issue about, public domain documents or government documents. If it's created by public staff or if it's created for a public client and adopted by the public entity, the public client, there are no copyright protections per se. That doesn't mean it's right to just copy it without attribution if you're taking different parts of it. But imagine what your ordinance would look like if you had to say, an ordinance for an accessory, definition for an accessory dwelling unit. See City of Portland, Oregon, document dated, blah, blah, blah. Building, see, blah, 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 this city. That's a crazy kind of attribution. And so you don't have to do it in that sort of a sense. And certainly you want to be able to use things from a good ordinance, particularly definitions that might have been challenged in court and that have been found to be constitutionally or legally valid. A great example is sexually oriented businesses. After the city of Renton won their big Supreme Court case decades ago, lots of cities' sexually oriented business ordinances look exactly like City of Renton. Or very similar because they used the same secondary studies. So you learn a lot. But a good example came out of this. This is a book that may be on many planners' bookshelves from APA, a glossary of zoning development and planning terms. And I found it really interesting that the editors of this, who went through hundreds of ordinances to find good definitions, noted in their notes, these definitions provide a good starting point for dealing with various things, but do not copy these definitions without thought. And I think that goes to a comment you've heard probably each of us make so far, that one size does not fit all. And you need to think about the community's capacity for enforcement and prosecution and defense and all of these things when you're writing an ordinance. So again, I found it interesting that this was just right up front in the introduction. So a good reminder.
Okay, we think we're ready for some scenarios.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is your comfort level? So we have some scenarios we'll run by you, and we'll use polling for this. And you've probably heard the story of the frog in the pot of water. If you put the frog in boiling water, or try to, they're going to jump out right away and really try to get away. If you try to but if you put a frog in a pot of lukewarm water, they will feel just fine. And if you turn up the heat slowly, they don't notice that they're headed for trouble. So we're going to do that with these scenarios. When do you start feeling uncomfortable? So these are simple scenarios with a lot of the detail stripped out of them. And these are, real generalized scenarios. In real life, each individual case is very fact specific, and we put in different facts, and different facts may change your answer, and your answer may change whether you're a private sector planner or a public sector planner. So let's give this a try. So our first scenario. An AICP planner for the city of A goes looking for a new way of saying what a comprehensive plan is. They find just the right words in a neighboring city's plan. They copy and paste it into their own city's plan draft. Keeping in mind the AICP code, on a 1 to 5 scale, with 1 being completely uncomfortable, 3 somewhere in the middle, 5 being completely comfortable. How comfortable are you with this?
Okay, I went ahead and launched that poll. We'll give it a few
Great.
seconds here, and then we'll show.
All right, so I bet people have either done this or run into this. So what do you think? Is this something you're comfortable with? Or 1 completely uncomfortable, 3 somewhere in the middle, 5 completely comfortable? That's okay.
Can you see it?
I can't. So Kim, can you report our findings?
Sure. Completely uncomfortable, 22%. Somewhat uncomfortable, 37%. Neither uncomfortable or comfortable, 14. Somewhat comfortable and completely comfortable, 19% and 7% respectively.
Ah, okay.
That kind of surprises me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Definitions are easy. Yeah.
yeah, boy, you guys are tough. I mean, I was a planner for 8 years, and I can say I kind of did this, but
Yeah.
you know, because sometimes it is just the right words, and you're like, this fits our community. It's so perfect. I can't, if I change a word, it's not the same meaning. But okay, well, let's try
A hard
scenario
group.
2 and see what happens. So Kim, do you want to do scenario 2 for us?
Two, sorry. A consultant planner, AICP, is hired by the city of A to update their sign code. Note it has nothing to do with the comprehensive plan definition. City A has had to deal with some contentious issues over temporary signs. The consultant finds what he thinks is just the right words in a neighboring city's sign code. They copy and paste it into their client's sign code draft. So keeping in mind the same code issues and the same scale, 1 being completely uncomfortable, 3 kind of neutral, and 5 being completely comfortable. How comfortable are you?
Okay, so note this is a little different from the last one. The last one was a plan, and this is code.
And was
I
this
could
one with
hear
a
all of you
consultant
thinking
hired
hard.
to do the plan versus
This was a
city
consultant.
staff?
And it's a consultant versus a public sector planner. Yeah.
If you're paying them more, do you hold them to a different standard?
Mm-hmm.
That's seemingly more, at least. But yeah.
Okay. Kim, can you tell us the results?
Sure. I've got from 1 to 5, completely uncomfortable, 15%, somewhat uncomfortable, 30, neutral, 14, and then 24 and 16% for somewhat comfortable and completely comfortable. So 45% in the uncomfortable range and 40% in the comfortable range.
Ooh, wow. So Kim, can you tell us a little bit about what we would maybe want to keep in mind on borrowing code language?
So, one of the things, especially with this scenario to me is, I think this probably often happens. The consultant maybe worked in a different city that had a similar problem and thinks, wow, maybe I can apply that. Or they know that somebody did this, or they get a reference from, some other planner, and they find this and they think it's great. Do they just copy and paste it into their client sign code as our work? Or have they discussed it with the client? Those might be fact issues that we want to know about from an ethics standpoint. Did they talk to the client and say, hey, we did this over here. It's really easy. We can pop it in. That saves us on budget, blah, blah, blah. Or how have they handled that part of it? is important. Again, the sign code's not copyrighted, so it's not a copyright issue. The question is it an ethics issue? Have they taken something and not made it clear where that came from, or are they taking credit for the work?
Right, and in the case we had with this, the planner who copied and pasted something from another plan he'd done, he did speak to some city staff about it, but he didn't speak to a particular commission in the city about it. And he also didn't tell the public, of course, that he borrowed this plan from elsewhere. And so if a planner or someone in the public doesn't like what you're doing as a planner, they'll often do a lot of research to find out what you've done, to find something wrong, and they'll submit an ethics case.
File a complaint.
Against you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Kim, you had talked about in the past making sure that even though you're maybe taking a bit of a sign code from some other city, making sure that it still is the law of the land, that there hasn't been a recent court case that has overturned something, or maybe your state law is different.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, you know, you'll often see on these, you know, what kind of, you do have to consider what kind of legal review is either the consultant bringing in, or can your own in-house attorneys do for just those issues, because you are exactly right. Something like a sign code is pretty national because it's often a free speech violation, but you may have different tweaks to it. Texas law, for example, allows what I think are really large political signs and doesn't require that they come down. And if you write a code that says they have to come down, are you violating state law? And if you've taken something from a different state that doesn't have that, say Virginia, then and plop it in, then yeah, it can be totally inappropriate.
Okay. You want to do scenario 3 for us, Kim?
Sure. So this is kind of similar. The planner, an AICP planner, finds just the right drawing illustrating what medium density residential is, right? We all know what medium density looks like in our mind, but they copy and paste it into the plan they're drafting and put in a caption with where they got the illustration. So again, keeping in mind the code on a scale of 1 to 5, from uncomfortable to comfortable, how comfortable are you?
Okay.
So we've got from 1 to 5, 8% completely uncomfortable, somewhat 13%, middle 9%, and the majority of people are somewhat or completely comfortable with it, with completely comfortable almost getting 50% at 47%, and somewhat comfortable at 23%. So yeah, by large, there you are.
Yeah, okay.
One of the keys here is that they cited where they got the illustration.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And whether they got that illustration from a public document or a book of definitions, like we showed you earlier, that's probably,
Yeah, okay. Well, let's try scenario 4, where they found just the right drawing illustrating medium density residential. They copy it, but they change the colors and the line weights, and they don't put in the little caption citation. So how comfortable are you with that scenario? 1, completely uncomfortable, 3, somewhere in the middle, 5, completely comfortable. So they've kind of changed it up just a little bit, and they've left that nice little citation off. All right, what are people thinking about this one?
So we've got, wow, 82% there at 1 and 2. So
okay,
evenly split.
yeah,
Everybody's completely
yeah,
uncomfortable
yeah.
with that, or
Okay.
somewhat uncomfortable.
All right. So
Only
we
2%
definitely
top.
we
Yeah.
definitely found the line on that one.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Oh, I think that's the same. What the heck? Let's go on to scenario 6 then. Starren, do you want to do scenario 6 for us?
Sure. A consultant AICP is hired by the City of A to write a traffic calming policy guide for the community. They find a good one in a neighboring city. They copy and paste it from heavily, but change the data and background information. They provide no attribution information and do not tell the Planning Commission that they have done this. Keeping in mind the AICP Code of Ethics on a scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable are you with this? Keeping in mind also that they did make some changes to it.
Okay, yeah, so they've copied and pasted from it a lot, but they changed the data and the background information, so they updated those things.
Can you repeat the prompt one more time?
So a consultant AICP is hired by the City of A to write a traffic calming policy guide for the community. They find a good one in the neighboring city. They copy and paste it very heavily, but they change the data and the background information. They provide no attribution for the information, and they don't tell the Planning Commission that they did it this way. So in a sense, they copied and pasted a plan and switched out the names and the statistical data and called it their own.
Thank you.
So scenario 6 winds up with completely uncomfortable, 45%, somewhat uncomfortable, 36%, 10% in the middle, and 7 and 2% at somewhat and completely comfortable. So again, a pretty clear line.
Yeah, that one's pretty clear. So let's tweak this scenario a little bit more. So Starren, do you want to read this one?
Sure. A consultant AICP is hired by the City of A to write a traffic calming policy guide for the community. They find a good one in the neighboring city. They copy and paste it heavily, but change the data and background information. They provide attribute information and tell the Planning Commission what they've done. So in a sense, it's the same scenario where they copied and pasted a previous plan, but they cited where they got the information from, and they informed the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Yeah, so they're at least transparent about what they did. And this is a consultant that the city's hired to do this.
Right.
All right, what are we hearing?
Well, it's flipped.
Aha.
And I'm going to start at the bottom. Completely comfortable, 48%, 32% somewhat comfortable. And trickling down from there. We've got 12% in the completely and somewhat uncomfortable, and about 9% in the middle.
Okay, so we're certainly seeing that being transparent makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And when I see stuff like this, I would have honestly voted neutral on this one. And that's just because, yes, you did cite it, but still, you were hired to do that work. You're supposed to be an expert, a consultant, and you copied and pasted. You may not get in trouble for it, but you may have a hard time getting work in the future with that client because you didn't bring anything to the table.
Well, and I was going to add, what I'd like to see in this is, okay, so when they tell the Planning Commission and hopefully council that, you know, what they did, have they also said, hey, this means we've reduced our budget. We can use your remaining budget for X because we didn't have to do all of this work. Does that help? Or does that help the situation?
Yeah. Okay. Let's try scenario 8. And Staryn, do you want to do this one?
Sure. A consultant AICP is hired by the City of A to write a growth management plan. They assign it to their newly hired planner right out of school, a non-AICP nor AICP candidate who has never even had a class on growth management. The new planner takes some shortcuts by copying and pasting from other works because they do not want to show that they have a lack of knowledge. So in a sense, this planner doesn't have the skills to complete the project, so they went and copied and pasted from some other sources.
Okay, what are you thinking about this one?
There we go. Completely uncomfortable, 73%. Somewhat uncomfortable, 17%. Boy, was this a bright line.
Yeah.
The 9% are spread between the others. So we've got,
Yeah. Okay. So we certainly think that AICP consultant needs to give a lot more supervision to who they've given this work to.
But it's also important, that's exactly the point I was going to say. The AICP or the supervisor who gave that person the assignment, they're responsible because that planner isn't AICP certified. They're right out of school. And it's that planner's responsibility to make sure that they're giving the task to someone who could actually do it, or at least showing them how to do it.
Yeah. Okay, how about scenario 9? Staryn, you want to do this one?
Sure. A consultant gives part of a big project to an out-of-work planner with a short deadline. They never give that planner credit for their work. So it's one of those situations where a project, oftentimes consultants wait until the last minute to do work and they can't get it all done in time. And so in this scenario, the planner asks an out-of-work planner to do part of the work for him because he can't get it all done in time. But then he doesn't give that planner credit.
Or he's doing his friend a favor since he's out of work.
And just a heads up, we've got one more scenario after that, and then we will get to some questions and things after that.
And early results are, again, a bright line, 54% completely uncomfortable, 26% somewhat uncomfortable, 12% neutral, then 8% in the other two categories, 6 and 2.
Yeah. Okay, well, and we're gonna ratchet this up a little bit with scenario 10. So Staryn, you want to do this one?
Sure. Consultant FAICP was the owner of a small planning firm that was acquired by a big multidisciplinary firm 3 years ago. They were let go soon after. Last month, they sat through a presentation given by the planner who replaced them at the big consulting firm that showcased some of the concepts that they developed while they were working at that firm. Or should I say, some of the concepts they developed at their firm prior to it being purchased by the larger firm. They were not listed as a source in the presentation. So in summary, that planner had a small firm that was purchased by a larger firm. And once he left that firm, some of the work that he did while he was working at the smaller firm was used by that larger firm, and he wasn't given credit for the work that he did.
Yeah, so the big firm's using his work and showing it off, but he doesn't work there anymore. But they did purchase his firm, so this is interesting.
So we've got 32%, and 26% completely or somewhat uncomfortable, 18% in the middle, and the other 23% with the least and completely comfortable. So that's what we've got in the scenario. And I'll add real quick that this is something that should have been addressed in the purchase agreement. So you might want to go back to their lawyer, but
yeah, so
sometimes a big firm purchases the intellectual property and documents and so forth of the smaller. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's not addressed. So yeah.
Right.
And sometimes the issue may be, sorry, I'll let you go.
Yeah.
Bonnie.
No, Darren, go right ahead.
I was gonna say, sometimes the issue may be that the person who sold their firm tries to use something that they produced before their small firm was acquired, but that big firm now owns that property. They purchased it. So it's a situation where you created something, but you don't own it anymore and you can't use it. So that's, I could see that happening often also.
Yeah. And then we just have to, for the AICP planners at the big firm, they have to sort of figure out, do we still have this expertise to be showing this work when we no longer employ the person who originally did it? So they don't want to be representing themselves as having this expertise when they don't. But if they do have the expertise, that's another.
And they bought it,
And they bought it, okay.
So you can see
we're
how
going to wrap
fact
up.
specific these are.
Yes, So we're going to wrap up just with a little bit about what about the unpaid labor of the public. So we're citing them in a way and using their work. And we've probably all seen where the food pantry is full of dented cans or wax beans. A great deal of the code talks about our obligations to involve the public and to particularly reach out to those who might not have the resources to be involved or speak out. Related to giving credit when credit is due and involving people is being mindful of when we might be asking a lot without paying for that knowledge, and leaning on those who may have more experience in different parts of the city or groups. For example, like what Portland, Oregon did with their Vision PDX, they gave small grants to different community groups to reach out to different publics that might be unreachable by planners. So actually gave a little money to be able to do that. Starren, I think you maybe have a little bit here, and then we'll take some questions.
All right, I worked on a BRT study that was in Minnesota at my previous firm. And one of the strategies that we used, it was a very low income community with a high level of transit need, but also they weren't very receptive to public involvement. And so we actually went out and met with some of the people who lived in the neighborhood and gave them training so that they could actually administer the surveys and hold stakeholder interviews, so that the public engagement was led by the public, and we took a portion of the budget in the project to pay those residents for their work. And so we, in a sense, created new planners, and we empowered that community to do something to rebuild their community themselves rather than having a consultant or the city do it. And so it's one of those situations where people are being paid to help out on the project, when oftentimes we do ask for free volunteer labor.
Okay. Well, so questions. Christine, have you picked out some good questions for us?
Indeed, I have. So the first question is, okay, so when we're borrowing, whether it's word for word concepts, paraphrasing, whatever it is, it's better be safe than sorry. What is the difference between directly citing something? Should we reference something just at the end and just a big long list of references? You know, where's that line on how we source things that we are taking?
That's a really good question.
From my perspective, a lot of the projects that I've worked on, we source. For instance, I'm working on a Texas Department of Transportation, and they like you to source every single thing you do. There's a section called resources where you actually list every resource that you work on with the link so people can access it themselves and read it. And then throughout the document, you do footnotes, endnotes, sourcing where you got that information. Even if you're paraphrasing something or it's your own idea, like you still cite where you gather that information from. And so that's not always what a city will want on a plan. They don't necessarily like to have, different types of references, but it's still important to cite where you get that information from. So you could have endnotes, or even maybe even a references section at the back of your document where you show where you got that information from.
Yeah, I think it depends on the type of document.
Oh, go ahead.
A bit. And that is a really, really good question. But for a public document, I agree. I suspect cities, public officials, most public officials probably don't want to see footnotes at every page.
Right.
Does it start to look like, an academic or law review article? So I think endnote reference is probably, a good idea.
And you can, if you don't want to put in, say, the little number to do end note or an in-text citation where you put in parentheses the author and the year, you could at the end have for each section, like chapter 1, have what things you used and do that so that people can go and find information that you used. Yeah. So Christine, you got another one for us?
Yeah, and there were some folks that also commented in about endnotes versus references versus in line, particularly for plans where it might just really clutter things up and, like you said, kind of start looking like an academic paper versus a guiding document kind of thing.
At the end of the day, you refer to your client what they want. Right. If they want it in the document, then you put it in a document.
Right. I worked for a city where city council was really largely NASA engineers. They probably would have loved footnotes. They didn't want to see all that scientific document, but yeah.
Okay, this is interesting. How do you appropriately cite sources that could change in the future? So I guess I would be thinking about, some kind of web page that had maybe demographic data or something, to ensure that someone that's looking at the source in the future, those numbers may have changed. So do you put like an as of date or something in a situation like that where you know that information might change?
Yeah, right. You put the date you accessed it.
Yeah.
And then they know that it was as of that date.
Yeah, because codes will get amended too. So even if you really do cite the definition from a signed code section, that could change. So
let's talk a little bit about self-plagiarism and how it's a thing and it can happen and it happens and you don't even realize that you're doing it. What are some things to look out for? What are some things to keep in mind when you're writing something that sounds quite familiar to something that you have previously written? And let's take it from two angles. One, I guess, and this is a little off topic, but since we're here, from the perspective of something that is published, some type of book versus, a plan or an opinion or something like that. So taking it from, I guess, two different angles.
Well, I think I'll jump in with maybe a slightly different take. If you are a planner working for a city and you're writing a staff report, you are probably plagiarizing yourself over and over again. Or another planner, previous planner in your city or another planner. And that's just, what's going to happen because you're trying to use the same criteria, you're using the same plan, you're kind of speaking in the voice of the city or the public of that city. And so you're going to be doing that a lot. Now, I think plagiarizing yourself as a consultant, that's when you have to really make sure, okay, I wrote this for city A, I now work for city B, and they want the same thing. How do I perhaps change that to fit the city better? Or do I make sure that, sure enough, they want the exact same thing? That kind of thing. So Staryn or Kim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's, sorry, I'll let you go, Kim.
No, go ahead, Staryn.
Well, the issue is you could have something that's great verbiage, and some people fall in love with their writing and how they said something, so they want to say it as often as they can. And that's cool, but not really, because the client paid you to get them something new, something that's specifically tailored to their needs. And that document may specifically address those needs, and it may be a cost savings to copy and paste, but you are still plagiarizing. You're still saying you're doing work and not actually doing the work. That's where the dishonesty comes in with that practice, because it's not something that's for that client. But yeah, there are firms out there. They rubber stamp plans, and they're really good at it. It's a good plan, so why not rubber stamp it? But the client doesn't want a rubber stamp plan typically. They want something that's tailored for them. So if you tell them that's what you're going to give them, that's what you have to give them, even if you have this brilliant language you wrote elsewhere.
Yeah. And I was just going to add too, part of it too is, especially if you take it from different city to different city, you learn different ways. You've been in some different trenches. Maybe you've been in litigation about a particular issue or how you wrote something before. And even if it was sustained, you may have learned something from that you make it better. So just thinking, oh, I was brilliant back then, let me use that. You need to, again, consider your own skill set and what you've learned and taken away from it. I do have self-plagiarism written on my list of topics that I think, it's always an issue. And it may depend too, the differences between a staff report at a city where they want a certain similar type of documentation and support or information on it, and versus being a paid consultant who wants something, so skewed, so unique to that city, not skewed. But yeah.
Well, and the kind of the self-plagiarism, particularly for a city, is you as the planner are trying to be consistent and even-handed. And so using some of that same language over and over again is going to ensure that you're being even-handed.
Yeah.
And when people write books or journal articles and they reference themselves, most of the time I see people actually referencing the previous document that they created. They don't,
Yeah.
I mean, they may not necessarily, put, I'm Staryn Fauché, I have a book, I quote Fauché 2006. People do that. I see it. You have to reference yourself so you can say where that information came from, because there could be a different line of thought associated with that statement in your previous document, and then you bring it to this new document, this new book, and it could be in a different context. So you have to make sure that people can track that.
Mm-hmm.
We had a webcast, and I don't know how I remembered this, but it was back in 2017. You can find it on our YouTube channel. And the host was the Urban Design and Planning Division, or Urban Design and Urban Design Division, and Preservation. That was it.
Yeah,
and
preservation.
It was back in June. It was called Images, Creative Commons, and Copyright. And what comes into play with this particular session that I just wanted to bring up was the use of images, photography, even when it comes to you're doing a plan and there's public participation and you're going to public participation events and taking photos, and how that works, and how are you allowed to use faces of people, and do they have to sign waivers, and can you put it into your final plan, and things of that nature. So one, I didn't know if anyone has any comments about those types of things, but then two, I also wanted to direct everyone's attention to go to our YouTube channel and search back from June of 2017, Images, Creative Commons, and Copyright. It was really good. It was super interesting, and there were things that you don't think about that might actually have some impact. But any thoughts about incorporating photography, staff photography, photography of the public in general, and putting them into reports, things like that?
Well, one thing is that if it is a public event, then they're in public. And so you can take a photo and use that because they're in public. It's not that you're taking a photo of them in their bedroom or their private home. So public is public.
Yeah, I have had staffs or planning consultants post signs at events too, just saying, we may be taking photographs. Because face it, if you put together a plan without photos or something in there, it's just a lot of words. So yeah.
One thing that I didn't do in the past when I go taking pictures, just transportation photos, is not blurring out the license plates. And so I got in trouble for that one time. So you have to make sure you remove something like that is identifying. There was a truck parking study I did, and my brother, he's a truck driver. He backs his truck up into his driveway. And so I took a picture of it, and it was on the cover of this document for a while, because the document is about people parking their trucks in the wrong place and needing trucking. So my brother got mad at me because he was on this document, and like the name of his business is right there on the side of the truck, and you see a picture of him getting out of the truck. And so he's like, no, you gotta take that off of there. So I blurred out the image. I retook the photo so he wasn't in it, and then I blurred out the name of his company and license plate. But yeah, he got on to me about that.
Yeah. Interesting Thanksgiving, huh?
Yeah.
Let's take one more question. This has come up a couple times in a few different fashions, but we're talking, and this ties back to one of the scenario questions, is you are a supervisor of non-AICP planners, and does AICP, the code of ethics, really apply to someone who is an AICP? Can you really try, as a supervisor who is AICP, instill the code of ethics in your non-AICP planners? Should you, could you, and at what point are you really responsible for your employees, and even though they're not AICP, but you are, and they're doing things against the code of ethics, or that are kind of gray, I guess I would say. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there is the APA itself has a code of ethics. So even if you're not AICP, there are APA ethics and principles. And then if the supervisor is AICP and they are putting their name, or they're saying that they supervised this person, then they're responsible for that person. But you will have, you can have a consulting firm where they're doing planning work and none of them are AICP. And so, no, they couldn't be held to those standards.
And I think a firm could adopt internal rules that would basically recreate the AICP code as its internal regulations. So from an employment standpoint, hold non-AICP members accountable for basically the same thing, but the ethics committee wouldn't see complaints about those planners. We would only see them about the AICP planner who may or may not have failed to adequately supervise.
Yeah.
And sometimes you run into planners who work for not planning firms, or maybe real estate companies or other agencies, where it doesn't behoove them to have an AICP certification because it would limit their ability to do their job. So there's a balance there.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up. A lot of questions that we didn't get a chance to get into. So folks, if you do have any burning questions that you have for our panelists, feel free to reach out to them. Their contact info is on the screen. We are recording the session. You can find it on our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/planningwebcast. Be sure to register for our upcoming sessions, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And don't forget, like I said, log those CM credits. And I think that's it. So thanks to the Kansas chapter of APA for hosting this session. And thanks to all of our attendees for joining in on all the polling questions. And of course, to our panelists, we thank you for doing a deep dive into this topic with us.
Thank you so
everyone,
much.
have a great rest of your week. Thank you, and we'll talk next time. Bye-bye.
All right, take care, guys.
Thanks, everybody.